Built for builders, from beginners to pros, this is where great backyards begin. Welcome to the Ultimate Deck Podcast, your source for backyard building tips, product breakdowns, and pro advice from the front lines of the industry. Here are your hosts, Shane Chapman and Wade Laurent.
Welcome back to the Ultimate Deck Podcast. It's just Shane again. Wade is gone again. I tell you, man, if I could only work part-time, well, maybe I do. Anyways, Wade's not here. We'll make sure we get him back on the next episode. But with him living in a different city, 2.5 hours away, it makes it a little bit tougher for us to get on the podcast at the same time. So we make it work when we can. And when we can't, well, you just get me. So today we're talking about picture framing decks, the practice of picture framing. So we're going to explain what that is, first of all, because many times when you talk to people and you ask, would you like to do a picture frame around your deck? They're like, what does that mean? So these can be called different things: picture framing a deck, bordering a deck. I don't know if there's other names, but essentially it's the practice of having a board kind of around the outer edge of the deck. That board may be a different color. Sometimes it's a different brand or different material even, but it serves multiple purposes. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is why you would ever do it. And that's primarily aesthetics. And so generally you're doing it because it looks better. Now, if you're doing wood versus composite, that's when this becomes more of a talking point. Composite decks or composite decks, I would say probably 90% of the time people do a picture frame border on a composite deck. And I would say 90% of the time on a wood deck, they do not. Now, the reason for that is many composite options in the market do not look the best on the cut ends. So at best, it may be a similar color to the surface of the board. At worst, it may be a profile where it's scalloped and just like it's not the right color and not the right shape on the ends of the deck. So what people try to avoid is having all your boards at the ends where they're cut off, to have it looking ugly because it's all scalloped or different profiles, whatever, and it's like not the same colors of decking, and it just doesn't look very nice. Now, you could paint those ends if it's a full thickness board, but that doesn't take care of any scallop profiles that may look a little bit funny. So to combat that, the practice of picture framing has become quite common. So that, again, is where you have one board that's kind of running around the edge of the deck on all sides, and it's doing a good job of hiding all the cut ends of all those interior or field boards. So it looks a lot cleaner, especially on composite decks, and it can kind of give it more of an artistic look. It looks a little bit more craftsman-y, like it looks like it takes a little bit more skill to do than just running deck boards straight across a deck. So it's helpful that way. On wood decks, it can avoid potential splinters at the edge of the deck. So it kind of hides the cut ends. And if you round over the cuts on the inside, you're basically hiding that exposed end wood grain that is more splintery than the rest of the board. So it can help with that as well. But given that wood is always the same color on the inside as it is on the outside, much less common to do it aesthetically. I still think it looks nice to do a picture frame. I still think the look of it is nicer than not doing it, but it's just much less needed for aesthetic purposes on a wood deck than it is on a composite deck. Now, the other reason to do it is it can help you with your board width options. So if you're going to build a deck that maybe you want to do a 13-foot wide deck or a 12.5-foot wide deck, and the composite boards that you want to use, they only come in 12-foot lengths or longer, but you don't want to waste. So by picture framing, you can extend the width of the deck without having to purchase larger boards. So all of a sudden, if you want to go, let's say even 13.5 feet, if you do a double picture frame around it, now you can use 12-foot boards, do a double picture frame, and still get 13.5 feet without having to upgrade to a 16-foot board and having a bunch of waste. So there is a functional reason to do it as well, not just aesthetics. And then there's the option of doing multiple picture frames. As we just said, double will give you so much width. You can do a single picture frame, double, triple. I've seen people do 4 picture frames, whatever suits your fancy. Often it's to make up that extra width, but also if you're doing a contrasting color, sometimes it looks nicer, especially on larger decks, to do multiple rows, because that way you're seeing more of that contrasting color, especially since just doing a single picture frame is often hidden underneath the railing. And so if you're wanting to see more of that accent, do a double or even a triple picture frame in that accent color. You can also alternate your colors. So you might do a light field color and then a dark picture frame, light picture frame, dark picture frame or something. And it kind of just gives it a much more interesting look and aesthetic to it by alternating different colors within it. You can also choose different widths. So some of these boards will come in a narrow board or a wide board, and you can start to play around with the aesthetic of that picture frame, or that racetrack, I've heard people call it as well. So it really can give you a much nicer look that's also potentially functional and potentially efficient if you're taking advantage of those extra widths. Now, if you're not needing the extra width, it just ends up being an added cost. If you're doing a 12-foot wide deck, you could just accomplish it with 12-foot wide boards, and you wouldn't need any extra framing, and you wouldn't be cutting any waste off. You'd just be perfectly and efficiently using the materials. Now, I'm not trying to talk you out of it, because I still think it looks much better with a picture frame. But if you were going to add the picture frame, then technically you're just cutting back, call it 8 inches of those, like 4 inches on each side, cutting away those groove boards, putting on an extra picture frame. So it's just extra material at this point. And you'll have to add probably an extra joist or maybe 2 and some blocking underneath. So you're adding a little bit of cost to accomplish the picture frame if you don't require the extra width or the efficiency of adding a picture frame board. So to each their own. I don't think in my building days that I ever did a composite deck that wasn't picture framed. I just think the look is much more clean. I think the aesthetic is much nicer. It looks a little bit more premium. It looks, you can, like, especially on your cut lines, if you keep those nice and straight by using a track saw or a steady hand and a chalk line, that look alongside a picture frame board that is straight looks like you had somebody who knew what they were doing. It's not, different widths or crooked cuts or whatever. So it can look like a much more premium deck. It also can allow you to create a bit of a drip edge at the edge of the deck as well. So if you're doing a fascia board on the edge of the deck, because you're doing composite or something, that picture frame board can act as the kind of the drip edge to prevent water and stuff from getting in between the fascia board and your framing. And so because that's going to cover that entire gap. So it has a functional purpose for that reason as well. What else do we want to talk about? When you're doing this, depending on the product that you're using, if you're going to use composite decking or PVC decking, you do need to make sure to pay attention to the manufacturer's suggested gapping. So the temperature at the time of the install will determine how much or what direction that the boards in the field in the middle are going to expand and contract. So if you do a picture frame, it's very enticing to want to cut that picture frame in and put it nice and tight up against it to leave no gap. The problem with that is if you're installing it in cooler weather, when that composite or PVC decking heats up, it's going to want to expand. And if your picture frame is in the way, it may cause some issues with potentially buckling or fasteners shearing off and what have you. So you got to make sure to leave a little bit of a gap there as well. There's gapping guidelines in every manufacturer's install guide, not just at the picture frame, but anywhere in the deck where you're going to have boards butting into. But just make sure to pay attention to that as well when you're doing that. When you're doing wood, again, like I said, it's not nearly as necessary for the aesthetic reason of the end cuts being exposed, but I do think it looks a lot nicer and cleaner. And if you're really adventurous, you can stain the boards a different color and it looks super sharp. I just saw somebody on Reddit the other day that did this, and I don't see it often, but every once a year, somebody will post a picture that they've done this, and it always looks so incredible. So you get that natural beauty of wood with this super nice aesthetic, this premium look of having an alternating picture frame. So in their example, they had stained the field interior boards a lighter color, like much more natural lighter color. Then they had one board they did in a dark picture frame color, stained dark, and then one more on the outside that was a light color. And that just, man, it pops. And then they had the railing kind of match that dark color. So you just had this like dark, light aesthetic that looked really, really sharp, really premium. So of course that takes a bit more effort because you got to worry about staining just that single board. But the result was a very, very, very attractive look. So that is all about picture framing your deck. I guess the one thing I'll touch on before, one more consideration for this, I suppose, This is probably a whole episode on its own, but not everybody is mitering those corners anymore. So when you do these picture frames, where they meet at the corners, people want to miter those joints all the time. And that's natural because that's what you do interior. With more stable work environments, you'd want to miter those and make them look nice and clean. You certainly can, but for the reasons I just gave about the expansion gaps, mitering a deck is going to look really great the day you do it, and it's going to look really not great down the road. Potentially even a week down the road as things cool off. Those will open up and gap. So a lot of people nowadays are, instead of doing miters, they're just doing butt joints on the corners. Now, if you're using a full thickness board that isn't scalloped, this still looks great. I would highly recommend touching up the end cuts with a paint. So you can get little bingo dabber style matching paint from our website, tuds.ca. The brand is called Accent, AXXENT, and they're little bingo dabbers with matched, like color matched paint. I think I can't remember, 8 or 10 different colors. Find the one that matches your decking and dab those ends, and it makes it look so much nicer. Just gets rid of that wood core look that might be just kind of like a pale gray, and maybe your decking is orangey brown or something else, or reddish brown or something. By touching up those ends, it looks so much better. And then that allows that butt joint corner to look so much nicer at the time of install and down the road, because it's not expanding and contracting away from each other. The picture frames aren't contracting away from each other and creating a large gap. There's no expectation of that corner ever being tight because you butt jointed it instead of a miter. So it just looks a lot cleaner from like on day one, and still looks good years down the road, as opposed to the miter, which may aesthetically deteriorate over time, we'll say. So one more fine point to that: if you're using a capped composite decking or a capped PVC decking, this is where that end cut paint comes into play. If you're still using some old school non-capped composite, the core of the board is the same color, and so not as much of a big deal to paint the end. In fact, I wouldn't paint the ends of those boards at all. But that is the practice of picture framing, race tracking, bordering your deck, what have you. It all just comes down to potentially efficient, potentially aesthetically pleasing. Can save cost as opposed to having extra waste. There's many, many reasons to it. I'd say the pros list is much longer than the cons. The only con to doing a picture frame border, in my opinion, is there might be a slight added cost to doing so, but to me, it's much worth it for the aesthetic, the premium look, and potentially the efficiency. It may not even cost much. It might actually save you money on your deck project as well. So definitely look up pictures. Go to Google and just search up picture frame deck or deck with border or something like that. You can see exactly what this looks like. You can see the multiple different configurations, whether it's different colors or accents. It doesn't have to be a different color, by the way. You can do it the same color as the rest of your deck if you want, but it still gives you that added benefit of looking a little bit cleaner, nicer, hiding those cut ends, and also acting as a drip cap over your fascia there. So lots of reasons to do it. Google it up, find what you love, and commit to it. It's going to look great. See you next week.